I never planned on waking up married. I definitely never planned on waking up married to my best friend, the one guy who'd spent a decade telling me, in that easy, certain voice, that he only liked women. But there we were, in a cheap Vegas hotel room with confetti still stuck to the carpet, a marriage certificate on the nightstand, and no memory of how it got there. We laughed it off. We said we'd get it annulled Monday morning. Then we found the letters, the ones we'd each written the night before, drunk enough to be honest and sober enough to mean every word. His letter shattered something in me. Mine apparently did the same to him. Neither of us was supposed to read what the other had written. But we did. And nothing between us was ever the same again. But what happened next changed my life forever. Daniel Reyes had built his whole identity around being the reliable one, the architect who showed up early, kept his promises, and never let his heart get in the way of a plan. Milo Ashworth was his opposite in every visible way. A wandering wedding photographer with paint-stained sneakers and a laugh that filled entire rooms. The kind of person who made friends with strangers on airplanes. They'd known each other since college, when Daniel's carefully drawn blueprints and Milo's chaotic creativity had somehow made them inseparable. For 10 years, Milo had dated women, always briefly, always with the same restless dissatisfaction, while Daniel quietly buried a truth he'd never spoken aloud, not even to himself in the mirror. He told himself it didn't matter. Some feelings, he believed, were meant to stay folded up small enough to carry without anyone noticing the weight. The trip to Vegas was supposed to be a simple bachelor celebration for a mutual friend's wedding, 3 nights of terrible karaoke and worse decisions. Neither of them remembered the chapel or the Elvis impersonator who apparently officiated, or the moment they'd exchanged rings made of gas station gum machine plastic. What they did remember, painfully, was the ritual they'd started years ago on any night they drank past midnight, writing a letter to be opened only someday, sealed and tucked into whichever jacket pocket was nearest. They'd never actually opened one, until the morning after, hungover and staring at a marriage certificate, when Daniel's fingers found an envelope in his blazer with his own name written on it in Milo's unmistakable, slanted handwriting. Daniel almost didn't open it. Some instinct told him that whatever was inside would not be undoable. But curiosity and something deeper he refused to name won. Milo's letter was 4 pages long, and by the second page, Daniel's hands were shaking. Milo had written about moments Daniel thought no one else had witnessed. The way Daniel went quiet during storms because his father used to leave during them. The night Daniel cried after his mentor died and Milo held his shoulder without saying a single word. Milo had written that he didn't know what to call what he felt, only that it terrified him more than anything he'd ever tried to write down before, and that some nights he stayed awake wondering if pretending to be someone he wasn't had become the only thing he was good at. Across the room, Milo was reading Daniel's letter, and his face had gone pale in a way Daniel had never seen. Daniel's letter confessed a truth he had rehearsed and discarded 100 times. That he had loved Milo since their 3rd year of college, quietly, hopelessly, convinced it would cost him the only friendship that had ever felt unconditional. He wrote that watching Milo date women had felt like slowly disappearing, and that he'd made peace with loving someone from a careful, safe distance for the rest of his life. Neither man spoke for a long moment. The air conditioner hummed. Neither could look away from the other. "I always thought I liked women," Milo finally said, his voice unsteady in a way that made Daniel's chest ache, "because I never let myself imagine liking you." It wasn't a confession delivered with confidence. It came out fractured, almost frightened, like a door being forced open after years of rust. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was too busy trying to determine whether this was real, or whether hope was simply lying to him the way it always had. They agreed, shakily, not to annul anything yet. Not until they understood what they'd stumbled into. What followed were weeks that neither man could have scripted. Milo started showing up at Daniel's apartment with takeout and no explanation, staying long after the food went cold, filling silences that had never needed filling before. Daniel found himself studying Milo's face for signs that this was temporary, a beautiful accident about to end. Their friends noticed the shift immediately. The lingering glances, the way Milo now reached for Daniel's sleeve instead of his shoulder, the way Daniel had started smiling in a manner people described as different, though no one could say exactly how. The unraveling began with Milo's father, a proud, old-fashioned man who had spent Milo's whole life praising him for his relationships with women, holding them up as proof that his son had turned out exactly right. When a photo from the Vegas wedding surfaced online, an old friend's careless post, two men laughing under string lights, matching plastic rings glinting in the flash. Milo's father called, furious and cold, demanding an explanation Milo wasn't ready to give. Milo, for the first time in his life, didn't perform certainty he didn't feel. He simply said, "I don't know what this is yet, but I know it's real," and hung up before his voice could betray him further. The twist came not from betrayal, but from truth arriving too early. Daniel, still guarding his heart like a man who'd survived one too many storms, discovered that Milo had written that letter not on a whim, but months before the Vegas trip. Carrying it, rewriting it, terrified to send it, for nearly half a year. It hadn't been a drunken confession at all. Vegas had simply been the night his courage ran out of excuses. Daniel realized, with a mixture of joy and quiet grief, that he had spent months mourning a love Milo had already been carrying toward him the entire time. The tragedy wasn't distance. It was timing and fear, and two men too afraid of losing each other to risk saying anything sooner. The climax arrived not with shouting, but with Milo standing in the rain outside Daniel's apartment, having driven 3 hours after a shattering conversation with his father, refusing shelter until he'd said what needed saying. "I'm done being the man everyone expects," Milo said, soaked and shivering, eyes fierce despite the tremor in his voice. "I don't want an annulment. I want the marriage. I want you, not the accident, the choice." Daniel stood in the doorway, torn between 10 years of caution and the one thing he'd never let himself want out loud. Rain blurred the streetlights behind Milo's silhouette. For the first time, Daniel stopped calculating the risk and simply stepped forward, closing the distance neither of them had dared to close before. They didn't get a fairy tale reconciliation with Milo's father, not immediately. Some wounds take longer to heal than a single scene allows. But they got each other, fully, without letters standing between them as translators for feelings too frightening to speak aloud. Months later, they renewed their vows properly, no confetti, no strangers, no Elvis impersonator. Just the two of them, a small circle of real friends, and 2 new letters written not out of fear this time but out of certainty. Daniel kept his letter to Milo folded in his wallet ever since, not because he needed reminding of what he felt, but because he never wanted to forget how close they'd come to never finding out. Some marriages begin with love. Theirs began with an accident and became the truest choice either of them ever made. The letters had promised honesty, but the months after Milo's confession in the rain taught both men that honesty was only the beginning. Real love, it turned out, demanded something harder, patience with the parts of each other still healing. Milo's father, Harold, did not call for 3 weeks. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected, and Daniel watched Milo check his phone every morning with a hope he tried and failed to hide. Then, on a gray Tuesday, Harold showed up unannounced at Milo's studio, standing awkwardly among half-finished canvases and stacks of wedding photography prints, looking like a man who had rehearsed an apology and forgotten every word of it. He didn't say he understood. He didn't say he was proud. He only said your mother would have wanted to meet him properly, and set down a small box that had belonged to Milo's grandmother. A set of cufflinks, tarnished with age, that Harold had once promised to give his son on his wedding day. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a bow. It was a man learning, slowly and imperfectly, to choose his son over his pride. Daniel, for his part, faced a quieter reckoning. He had spent a decade building a life around control, designing buildings with clean lines and predictable structures because people, he'd learned early, could collapse without warning. Loving Milo meant surrendering that control entirely, and some nights the fear crept back, whispering that something this good was borrowed time. It was Milo who noticed first, the way Daniel sometimes went still and distant after good days, as if bracing for the moment it would be taken away. "You're allowed to just be happy, Daniel," Milo told him one evening, their hands linked across a kitchen table cluttered with blueprints and film negatives. "Nobody's coming to take this away from you. Not this time." Daniel didn't have an answer. He simply held on tighter, letting the silence say what his voice couldn't yet manage. Their families slowly stitched themselves into a new shape around them. Milo's college roommate, Tobias, became something like a brother to Daniel, showing up with terrible advice and better company whenever either man needed distraction from his own thoughts. Daniel's mentor's old firm offered him a partnership, and for the first time, Daniel let Milo's name slip naturally into conversation with colleagues, not as a secret carried carefully, but as a fact spoken plainly, the way anyone might mention someone they loved. The true test came almost a year later, when Milo was offered a photography contract overseas. 6 months in another country, the kind of opportunity he'd chased his whole career without ever expecting it to actually arrive. He almost turned it down without telling Daniel, afraid that saying it aloud would force a choice neither of them wanted to make. Daniel found the acceptance letter half-drafted, deleted, and drafted again in Milo's laptop, and instead of feeling threatened, he did something that surprised them both. He booked a flight to visit for 2 of those 6 months, blueprints and video calls and all. "I'm not asking you to shrink your life to fit mine," Daniel said, handing him the boarding pass like a promise. "I spent 10 years doing that to myself. I won't watch you do it too." They wrote letters again that year, an ocean apart, not out of fear this time but out of habit turned tradition. Proof that some distances could be crossed with nothing but ink, patience, and the certainty that had once taken them a decade and a drunken Vegas night to find. When Milo came home, Daniel was waiting at the airport with the same nervous energy he'd had the morning they read those first letters, as if some part of him still couldn't quite believe this was real. Milo dropped his bags and simply said, "I chose right, didn't I?" Daniel didn't answer with words. He answered by pulling him into an embrace that told anyone watching everything that needed to be told. That an accident in Vegas had become the truest, most deliberate choice of both their lives, and that whatever came next, they would write it together, one letter, 1 year, one chosen morning at a time. 3 years had passed since the night in Vegas that neither of them could fully remember, and yet Daniel still kept the original letter. Creased, faded at the folds, tucked inside a drawer. In the home they now shared. It wasn't sentimentality alone that kept it there. It was proof, on the hardest days, that some truths survive even when courage fails to speak them the first time. Their life together had settled into something neither man had dared imagine in his 20s. Mornings spent arguing gently over coffee about whether Milo's darkroom chemicals belonged in the kitchen cabinet. Evenings spent with Daniel sketching building facades while Milo edited photographs from whatever wedding he'd shot that weekend. Other people's weddings, always a strange, tender reminder of how their own had begun. They had never had the big, planned ceremony most couples dreamed of. Their first vows had been an accident. Their second had been quiet and small. But their life, day by day, had become the real ceremony, the one renewed not with rings, but with choices made again and again. Harold, Milo's father, surprised them both by asking, almost shyly, if he could walk Milo down the aisle at Tobias's wedding reception. Just once, for practice, he said, since I never got to do it right the first time. It was as close to an apology as the man would ever fully voice, and Milo accepted it exactly as it was offered, imperfect, late, but real. Daniel watched from the crowd, throat tight, understanding now that healing rarely arrived as a single moment. It arrived in small, repeated gestures, forgiveness handed over one quiet act at a time. The one shadow that lingered was a question neither man asked aloud for a long while. Whether their story, born from an accident, could ever feel entirely intentional. It was Milo who finally answered it, on an ordinary Thursday with no anniversary, no occasion, nothing but rain against the windows echoing that first storm outside Daniel's apartment. He handed Daniel a new letter, unprompted, unplanned. I know how we started, Milo said, watching Daniel's hands tremble slightly as he opened it. I just wanted you to have something that proves how sure I am about where we're going. Inside, in Milo's familiar slanted handwriting, was a single line. Some men spend their whole lives afraid of accidents. I spent mine waiting for the one that would save me. Daniel didn't respond with words. He folded the letter carefully, placed it beside the first one in that same worn drawer, and pulled Milo close enough that neither of them needed to speak at all. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and unhurried. The same rain that had once forced a frightened, soaked man to finally say what he meant. Inside, two men who had once been afraid of their own truths sat together in comfortable silence, certain, at last, that whatever letters they wrote from here forward would never again need fear to find their way into the open. Their story hadn't been written by fate, or luck, or destiny. It had been written, quite simply, by two people who chose each other, over and over, long after the accident that started it all had become nothing more than the first page of a much longer, much braver love.